I took a night job that came with simple rules. The house does not forgive mistakes. I took the gig because it sounded harmless and I needed cash. The pay was more than fair for watering plants and checking locks. The message said the house had rules. I told myself rules were a relief. The job came through a local board I checked at night, when the apartment was hot and the glow from my phone made the ceiling swim. Short-term work, flexible hours, no commute. The poster called themselves M and never added a last name. The house was on the edge of the old part of town, where the road narrowed and the trees leaned in. We set it up in a quiet thread. M kept their sentences short too. They paid half up front through a transfer that arrived like a warm pulse on my screen and said the rest would come when I sent a final check-in after the night. I asked what errands exactly. M replied with a picture of a lined page torn from a spiral pad. 9 rules, clear block letters, a pressure mark from the pen pressed so deep it dented the paper. The photo was lit by a yellow bulb. The top edge had thumbtack holes. A smudge on the right margin looked like a fingerprint. The rules were these. 1. Arrive before dusk. Use the side gate, do not knock. 2. Do not speak your name out loud while inside the house. 3. If the landline rings once, let it ring. If it rings twice, unplug it. If it rings 3 times, step outside, count to 60, come back in, and plug it in again. 4. Do not open the guest room door after 11 p.m. 5. The mirrors do not face each other. If you find 2 that do, turn 1 to the wall. 6. Feed the fern by the kitchen sink. If you forget, the kitchen will be colder than the rest of the house. 7. If you hear me call you, do not answer. 8. Place the ledger on the hall table at midnight. Do not write in it. 9. Leave by first light. Lock the side gate. Do not look back at the upper windows. I zoomed in and out, checking if it was a joke. The letters were steady and squared with little flourishes on the numbers. A second picture came right after, a call log with times stacked like small tombstones. Unknown numbers at odd hours. 11 p.m., 2:22 a.m., 3:03 a.m. M wrote, "This is a quiet house when you listen." I sent back a thumbs up and a question mark. M replied with an address, a gate code, and "Please don't knock." They added, "The ledger is in the hall, it keeps track of who keeps track." I laughed, alone in my hot kitchen. My own refrigerator hummed like a throat clearing. The bank app showed the deposit. Numbers have a way of making any story sound reasonable. I told myself rules meant order, and order meant safety. I told myself that more than once. I arrived before dusk. The sky was thin and pink where it showed through the tall pines. The house sat back from the road, pale siding the color of old paper, shutters a darker gray. The side gate was taller than me and heavy, with a latch that didn't match the wood. The code clicked the bolt open. A smell like wet copper drifted from the hedges, but there was no sound, not even birds. My hands felt too warm on the wood. The side path was packed dirt and flat stones. It guided me past a window whose curtains were drawn. Whatever was inside pressed its dark right up to the glass. The door at the end was under a small overhang, painted a gloss black that kept the day from getting in. I found the spare key under a terracotta saucer, exactly where M had said it would be. The metal had the last heat from the sun. I did not knock. Inside, the air smelled of dust and lemon oil. The vestibule was narrow and tall, with a light that came on a second after I entered, as if it had to think about it. The floorboards creaked with an old, slow tone under my feet. My breath cooled. I crossed the threshold and closed the door behind me. The lock turned with a firm click that sounded like a sentence. The first thing I saw was the note from the photo, pinned to a corkboard on the kitchen wall with 2 black thumbtacks. The paper was more worn than in the picture. The top edges had curled. A second page hung below it, blank except for a printed phone number labeled emergency contact. The name above it was just M again. The pen hanging from a string next to the note had teeth marks along the cap, as if someone had chewed on it, thinking. The house spoke in small ways. The refrigerator's fan started and stopped with a breathy tick. The wall clock over the doorway muttered in its own tongue, steady and soft. Somewhere deep inside, pipes sighed as they cooled. The kitchen tiles were cool on the soles of my feet, even through my shoes. The fern by the sink drooped in a way that made me feel, for a strange second, like it had been waiting for me. I set down my bag and pulled out the errands list Em had texted. It was longer than the rules but less strange. Water fern until soil is dark, wipe fingerprints from the glass door, set thermostat to 67 by 9 p.m., bring the ledger from the sideboard to the hall table at midnight, sweep dirt if tracked in. A normal house list with a few odd ingredients. I was to be there until dawn. I texted Em, here. The message showed as delivered and then stayed gray. I took a short video of the fern sagging its fronds and the rule page above it and sent that too, with a joke about plant neglect. No reply. I added a photo of the key on the counter, the cooktop, my shoes by the mat. The video played in a loop on my screen. In the reflection in the oven door, my face looked slightly further back than it should have been. I turned on a lamp in the living room. Its shade was paper, and the light it cast was soft and the color of old tea. Frames lined the wall by the hallway, landscapes with no people in them, all taken at the edge of evening. A dock that led into water so smooth it looked solid. A field where the wind had pressed grasses one way, like a fallen crowd. A road with painted lines that went under a stand of trees and became a tunnel. The pictures carried their own air, cool, clean, with a chill that caught me in the back of the throat. The guest room door was at the end of the hall, painted the same pale as the walls, but it had a blue ribbon tied on the knob. The ribbon had been cut from something else, the edges were frayed. I stood there, listening. The house just breathed. I kept my distance. Rules were not hard if you respected them from the start. I watered the fern, watching the soil drink and glaze. A glass door in the kitchen looked out into a small backyard with uneven flagstones and a bird bath dry as a cupped hand. My own reflection in the glass looked like I was standing in the yard, and the yard was inside the kitchen. I lifted my hand. My reflection lifted a little late. The glass held a faint handprint. My size. The temperature dipped a degree. When the landline rang the first time, I almost answered it out of habit, the way you flinch at your name. The tone was old and round, a real bell, not the thin sound of a modern phone. It rang once and stopped. My heart had already started to run. I laughed again and felt my breath come back cool. By 9, it was fully dark. The thermostat read 67 as required. The fern had perked up. The rest of the house balanced in the strange equilibrium of other people's things. I swept the little bits of dirt I'd tracked in and tucked the broom back where it had leaned. Then I made a circuit with the rule list in my head as a map. The mirrors thing bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Mirrors don't want anything. The bathroom off the hall had a square mirror above the sink. The guest room door, blue ribbon, didn't have a mirror outside it. The living room had a long mirror hung where you could see yourself and half the room behind you. The hallway had no mirror at all, just a thin runner and the frames of those cool, empty places. In the bedroom at the front of the house, the closet door was ajar. Inside, a full-length mirror stood on the floor, propped against the wall. The angle was wrong. It faced the corner. I cautioned that choice with a nod I didn't even feel myself make, because there was nothing there to face but the junction where two walls met and made a seam. When I moved to adjust the mirror, my fingers went cold, like I dipped them in ice water. I left it alone. The landline rang twice at 10:14. I had set a timer because I didn't trust my mind to hold all the small agreements. 2 rings, unplug it. The cord was curled and brittle. Dust puffed from the wall plate when I pulled it. The house went very quiet then. Even the clock seemed to hush, as if it had been waiting to see what I would do. My skin felt too large. I texted him again, unplugged per rule 3. The message sat there. I scrolled up and down the thread, looking for some clue in our earlier exchange. There was nothing but times and addresses and the first deposit. I sent a photo of the unplugged phone. In it, on the edge of the frame, the corner mirror in the bedroom reflected the angle of the hall. Nothing stood there but the faint shape of the runner and the shadow of my own shoulder. At 11:03, a picture came in from Em that made me set my phone down on the counter and not touch it for a full minute. It was a Polaroid of the hall I stood in. The frame's white border was smudged, and the image had that hazy, chemical flatness. The time was stamped in the lower right corner in ink, 1:18 a.m. In the Polaroid, the guest room door was open. I touched the paper on my screen to make it bigger and smaller, as if something would change. The angle matched where I was standing now. The runner, the frames, the blue ribbon on the knob. The blue ribbon hung in a loose curve, as if released. A second image arrived, slower, like someone sending it from bad reception. The second image was the same hall, same stamp, same angle, but the ledger, an old, thick book bound in black, rested on the table under the mirror. The ledger wasn't there now. I hadn't moved it yet. My fingers felt slick. I typed, "Is this a joke?" and erased it. I typed, "You already did this," and erased that too. Then I sent, "Who took these?" A moment passed. The dots of typing appeared and went away. No answer came through, not then. I set the landline back into the wall at 11:10 because I wanted the rules to be a structure, something that would hold me up. The plastic prongs went in reluctantly, like pushing a key into hard clay. The second hand on the wall clock ticked back to its steady speech. I stepped to the hall and looked at the guest room door again. The ribbon's knot had shifted. It was nothing. I told myself that and felt it come back empty. At 11:11, the thermostat's fan pushed a ribbon of air under the bedroom door. It smelled like dust and old linen. The house had settled down into its sharp smells: wood polish, cool glass, cold metal like you taste on a coin. My phone vibrated on the counter, loud as a knock. A new message showed from M, but the contact name had shifted. It read me. I stared so long my eyes watered. The message was a block of text, too many characters, the app compressing it to a neat box. I pushed with my thumb to open the full thing. It was a list of instructions, my list, copied from the kitchen corkboard. Only one line had changed. It said, 7, if you hear me call you, answer. Then a second message came right after it, short, don't. The landline began to ring 1 minute after midnight, as if the house had been waiting in a crouch and sprang. One ring, I let it ring. The sound climbed the hall and filled the spaces behind the frames and poured itself into the corners. 2 rings. I pulled the cord. The instant the plug slid out, I heard the third ring, not in the phone but inside the walls, as if something had learned the sound and was doing an impression of it too close to my ear. I stepped outside the side door because it was easier to obey a rule if you didn't think. The night hit me in the face like a wet cloth, warmer than the house, thick and very still. I counted to 60, counting my breaths. As I counted, a light came on in one of the upstairs windows, yellow and weak and the wrong shape, the way a square looks in a crooked mirror. I reached 40 and lost track and started at 30 and made up the numbers in the spaces my mind dropped. The porch boards under my shoes felt soft and damp, as if they had been held in a mouth. When I came back in, the smell of lemon oil had thinned. The kitchen tiles held down the cool like a lid. The unplugged landline lay on its side like a thing taken apart. I plugged it back in. The cord tugged against my hand. The hall stretched in front of me, and the guest room door leaned away and then back, a trick of breath and light, I told myself. At the edge of my hearing, a voice said my name. It was my name as my mother said it when I was in trouble, full and careful, with a pause before the last letter. I put my hand flat on my chest like that would keep it in. The rule said not to answer, and I didn't. The voice said my name again, from down the hall, closer to the blue ribbon. I walked into the living room instead and turned on a second lamp. The extra light made the other part of the room darker, the way light presses shadow deeper. The voice did not call again for a while. At 12:10, I remembered the ledger. It waited on the sideboard, as old as the sense that old leather sometimes carries in a room, a gravity. It had a keyhole, but no key. A thin line of dust around it said it hadn't been moved much. I lifted it. Heat bloomed through the cover like something sleeping had rolled and found a warmer place. The instruction had said to place it on the hall table at midnight. I was late. I hadn't written in it. I didn't intend to, but I wanted to know what someone had. I eased the cover open a little and looked without touching. The pages were heavy and smelled like dry bread. Names ran down the left margin in pencil, a column of careful letters in a hand so neat it was almost hesitant. Beside each name was a date and a time, a series of times really, start and end. Some ended in the morning. Some had no end. The most recent entries were spaced closer together, as if whoever wrote them had been in a hurry or had less room. The last full name I saw was M. I closed the ledger as if it could feel my breath, held it against my chest like it would fall if I didn't. As soon as I placed it on the hall table, the blue ribbon on the guest room door lifted a fraction and dropped. The wall clock coughed a minute. The fern fronds rustled, though there was no air moving. The house had tiny ways of telling me I was on time or late and what that meant to it. At past, my phone showed a missed call from my sister. The number was hers, the profile picture the same one I knew, her hair blown into her face on a windy porch, her eyes bright as if surprised by good news. A voicemail bubble waited, a small red egg. I didn't press play. I called her back. It rang and slid to nothing. A text came instead, a second after I put the phone down. It said, "You there?" It said my name in the way my sister says it, like it has a joke inside it we never tell. I typed, "Yes, I'm fine, can I call you later?" and stared at the bubble while it sat and thought about being blue. The landline clicked even though I hadn't touched it. The part of the house that was not a person moved a little closer. The blue ribbon quivered. I put the phone face down and stepped away like it might bite me. The voice came again at 12:44, and this time it was not my mother. It was my sister, or it wore her voice as well as any person could wear a coat. The weight of it was perfect. The tone had the small rasp that comes when you talk too much in a day. The sound filled the hallway, not from one direction but everywhere at once, as if the vowels were printed on the paint. It said my name, and then, "Please." I hadn't answered the first time. I shouldn't answer now. The rule had bent once already in the message. Please. The word was a soft hook under my ribs. I walked to the edge of the hall. The air grew colder there. The hair on my arms lifted in memory of wind. I could smell old cotton, like a closet where linens are kept and never washed in hot water. The door with the blue ribbon didn't move. The house waited. I said without thinking, "I'm here." The words came out as steam in the cold. The second I spoke, the floor under my feet felt like someone had gently tugged a rug. I caught myself on the hall table. The ledger slid half an inch. The frames on the walls leaned a hair more. The air did not move, but the house did, all the same, like the tide coming in under a dock. "Please," my sister's voice said, lower, like she had turned her mouth toward the floor. I could hear wet on one consonant, the way you can hear a person swallow right before they speak. "Please open the door." The voice didn't name a door. It didn't have to. The blue ribbon woke with a tiny whisper and went still. I took a step and then another, my soul's quiet on the runner, the house listening to the sound of me. The rule about 11 had passed. It was after midnight. I had outlasted one part and been careless with another. My hand lifted and hovered over the ribbon. The fabric brushed my skin like someone else's breath. The voice moved and became not my sister but my father, which was a neat trick because my father had been gone 2 years and the last voicemail I had from him sounded like wind pouring through a pipe. He said my name and added the word kid, which he never called me unless he was tired. I stepped back. The runner gripped my shoe as if the nap of the carpet had teeth. I said, "I can't." I said, "I'm sorry." I said, "I have to follow the rules." The voice said nothing after that for a while, and the quiet had shape. It'd wait. I stood in the kitchen and wrote the rules on a sticky note from my own bag, in case I needed to carry them in my pocket like medicine. The pencil looked darker on M's paper than it did on mine. The emergency number printed on the second page under the pinned rules sat there like a little hole. I didn't call it. My phone buzzed, a slow insect. Another message from M came in. Look at the photo again. I opened the picture with the 1:18 a.m. stamp. I moved it around the screen with 2 fingers like I was smoothing a wrinkle. There was the open door. There was the ledger on the hall table. Behind the ledger, on the wall, the long mirror reflected the empty hallway and the dim mouth of the guest room. But in the low right corner of that reflection, a shape had been hiding in the shadow of the frame. It was the outline of a shoulder and the edge of a head turned away, as if whoever took the picture had not been alone. I held my phone under the kitchen light to erase the glare. The shape looked like me. I checked the mirror now. It showed my shoulder, and behind it, nothing. I moved left and right. In the Polaroid on my phone, the shoulder did not move with me because it was already placed, and whatever put it there didn't know I'd notice later. The landline hummed, not ringing, not quiet. I heard the subtle shift of the house losing heat. The fern by the sink turned one frond as if to look. I stood in the kitchen a long time and thought about what would happen if I left a rule broken and walked away. The thought made the muscles down my back tight, as if I were about to be touched. At 1:16, the upstairs light that I had seen from the porch came on again, steady and pale. It made a rectangle on the ceiling above the hall, the way light does when there's a cracked door and someone in a room doing a thing in an old rhythm. I didn't know if there were rules about stairs. There were no rules about upstairs. That felt like an absence, like an open question you could fall through. I took a picture of the rules on the corkboard and sent it to Em with the message, "What about upstairs?" The dots appeared. A reply came, "Don't." Then, a minute later, "If you must, don't use your name." The sense of being shepherded by someone who had made this walk so many times they had stopped needing to look where they put their feet felt both comforting and terrible. I stood at the bottom of the stairs and did not go up. At 1:18, the time stamped on the Polaroid, the guest room door opened 1 inch and stopped. The ribbon tightened. The hinge made a sound like a person swallowing the end of a word. Cold rushed out like something held its breath on the other side and let it go. I smelled iron and starch and old soap. My mouth went dry. The ledger's cover flexed. I don't know why I touched the ledger then. Maybe because it looked like a thing meant to anchor a table in a room that had, suddenly, lost weight. I put my hand flat on it. Heat surged up through my palm. The names on the first page stirred in the edge of my mind as if each letter had a very small leg and was learning to walk. I pressed down to keep it closed. The guest room door gathered itself like a lung and opened another inch. The rules said not to open, not to answer, not to name. If I left, I knew I would carry this house with me the way you carry a sound you can't place. The thought made it hard to swallow. I called the emergency number. It rang once. It rang twice. It split into 2 sounds, one in my ear and one in the wall. A voice said, "Hello," and it was my voice. It was my voice the way a recording is your voice when you have never heard yourself from outside your own skull. I didn't speak for a second, and in the small pocket of quiet, I heard something move upstairs, slow and heavy, like someone dragging a bag of old clothes across a wooden floor. The voice said, "Are you there?" And I said yes, and then caught the word like a fly between 2 fingers and squeezed. My voice on the phone said, "Don't open the door." I believed it because it sounded tired and kind in the way I sometimes am when I talk to strangers who need small things at closing time. I said, "Who is this?" The line was quiet. I heard my own breathing back at me a half-second late, as if the house were a canyon or a long hallway. Then the voice said, "I am you after," and the way it said after made the skin behind my neck pull tight. The phone clicked and went dead. The landline, unplugged and plugged, had grown indifferent to me. Upstairs, the light went off. I heard a step. Another. The good wood of the stairs made a low animal sound. The guest room door swung another inch open. The ribbon's knot slid like a throat. The smell of laundry and iron and wet pennies rolled out and eddied around my knees. In that smell was a memory I didn't want. Of a doctor's waiting room on a winter afternoon when evening comes too early, and a small television on low with captions, and the way the air tastes before someone tells you a new fact about your life, and the day ends differently than it would have. The clock in the kitchen ticked a pattern like footsteps in another room. I thought about the job as a job, a task to finish, and about the second half of the pay. I watched the guest room door move without touching it. I put my phone down so I would not send another message to someone who might not exist. I stood in the cold seam between the kitchen and the hall and decided I wanted to end this on terms I recognized, even if I had to bend a rule to do it. I said out loud, but not my name, "I'm not your kid, and I'm not your sister, and I am not the person you have stored in your mouth." The house took the words and made ice with them. The air went quiet as fabric pinned under a heavy book. Then, from upstairs, a different voice I had never heard said, softly, "Hungry." I picked up the ledger. I let it open. The names looked up at me from their column like fish at the bottom of clear water. There was M, and a line that ran beside their name from one date to another. There was a blank space below it. There was a note in the same careful hand in the margin by one earlier name, answered, and the rest of the row shaded lightly as if someone had once been sitting in a sunbeam and moved. There were other marks that made sense in that way private notes make sense to the person who writes them. 2 small dots by a name that had a start time and no end. A star by one with a time, and then the word left. A near-empty page near the back where someone had dug the point of a pen through frustrated loops. The ledger was a story without narration. It was enough. I took the pen that hung by the corkboard and brought it to the hall table. The rule had said, "Do not write in it." I didn't intend to. I placed the pen carefully beside the ledger. Upstairs, a floorboard made a sound like someone stepping a little to the left to avoid a creak and getting it wrong. The guest room door was now open a hand's width. In the dark beyond was not a room, but the idea of a room, the way your mind makes a shape just before the power goes out. The ledger pages moved under my hand as if a draft had gone through, but no air moved. I pressed my palm to the paper. The smoothness had a thrum in it, like a small machine winding up. I said, "All right," and I lifted my hand quickly and touched the high right corner of a page, a tiny, precise touch in a place that seemed less defended. The thrum faltered. The upstairs steps stopped. I am no good with strategy in games, but rules always made me a better player. If you are told you cannot do a thing, it implies something else can. I slid the ledger, still open, until the mirror reflected its pages. The mirror threw the handwriting back to me left-handed. In reflection, the name M became something I could not read. In reflection, the blank line under it looked like a door. In reflection, the word answered seemed smaller. Behind me, the landline rang again. One ring, then a silence so thin I could hear the small sound of the pen's string twisting on itself. 2 rings. I could have unplugged it, but the rules had steadied me and then slipped away, and I decided to set my own rhythm. The ledger reflected in the mirror showed a page I did not have open, but when I turned the book, the page I had seen in the glass was there, as if the mirror had run ahead and set it ready. At the top of the page, a sentence appeared in the neat block hand that had written the rules. "If you hear me call you, write the name you answer to." The landline rang a third time, deep and warm, a bell in the ribs of the house. The rule about stepping outside was no longer large enough to fit the shape of the night. I said, not my name, but a name I used when I wanted to walk away from a conversation more easily than if I had left myself tied to it. I wrote it on the blank line under M, the name I had answered to twice in the last year with strangers who didn't need anything permanent from me. The pen's tip was a needle. The ink had a smell like new pennies. Upstairs, the steps that had stopped did not move again. The temperature in the hall rose a single degree. The ribbon on the guest room door lay quiet against the wood. The mirror reflected the book and the hall and a thin slice of my face, and in that slice, the eyes looked different, not like mine and not unlike either. I closed the ledger. I placed it back on the table. I placed the pen on top of it, and the small weight of the pen was correct. I exhaled and felt like I had been holding my breath since before I came in the gate. My phone chimed. A new text from M came in, "Keep going." Then, "Don't look upstairs." The message felt like a hand on my shoulder at the exact moment I needed one to keep from turning. I kept my eyes on the book. I said to the air, "I am placing the ledger now." The wall clock ticked twice and then went one tiny tick backward and then forward again, as if sampling its own voice. I went to the kitchen and poured water into a glass. The water had that house taste, like pipes that still remember iron. The fern had perked one more degree. The thermostat still held its number. The landline sat in its cradle as if it had never been anything but quiet. I held the glass and let the cool print into my palm. I did not look at the upstairs light. At 2, the front door knob turned a half-inch and set itself back as if someone on the other side had leaned their weight into it and then decided on another door. I held my breath so hard I felt a small pain in the side of my throat. The house felt, for 1 second, like it braced. The birds outside, if there had been birds, were asleep with their heads tucked into feathers and did not make any noise. The trees did not move. Time gathered its coat around itself and waited in the hall. My phone lit by itself on the counter. A call came in. The screen read me again, which was worse the second time. The profile picture was the same as M's, a gray circle with an initial in it because they had never sent their face. The call buzzed like a ceiling light in a stairwell. I let it ring and kept my eyes on the seam where the wall met the ceiling. The call ended. A voicemail appeared. I did not play it. A copy of the voicemail arrived as text. Please open the guest room door. It is very cold. It hurts. The ink on the rules page had a small shine where the light hit it. The paper had been handled so many times the fibers had pressed flat. A grease mark by Rule 9 looked like a thumb pressed in thought. I ran my finger above the rules and felt the air around the words cooler by a fraction, as if the house itself had conspired to make those lines into something more than instruction. I thought about M, I thought about the neat letters and the ledger with its patient measurements. I thought about the people in the column whose names I could not imagine on faces. I thought about the hand that had written answered beside a name and the way someone had dragged ink through paper on a blank page as if a pen could change the shape of a knight if you pushed hard enough. I thought about the deposit into my account and the shape of kneading. The thoughts were stones I held in my mouth and turned with my tongue. At 2:40, a soft sound came down the stairs. Not a step. The sound a chain makes when you lower a bucket into a well with care. It went on too long to be a short thing. The house creaked in answer, old wood talking to itself about weight. I stood in the doorway between rooms, where the air made a seam, and I said no and reached up and turned the hall mirror to face the wall. The reflection of the ledger and the open dark of the guest room disappeared. The hall became just a hall again, a long place with frames of empty places. In the second after I turned the mirror, the cold on my skin retreated like a tide. Something upstairs sighed and settled its shape into a new shape that did not require me to see it. For a moment, I was wrecked by relief, so complete it almost made me laugh. I kept moving because stopping makes a space where fear can stand up and introduce itself. I checked the thermostat. I pressed my fingers into the soil around the fern. Damp, dark, as instructed. I ran a paper towel over the glass of the kitchen door and removed a crescent of a handprint and my own cloudy breathing. I washed the glass until it squeaked. In the reflection in the pane, the yard looked both near and far, like a model of a yard under a bell jar. At 3 o'clock, the heat did a thing the house had warned me about with no words. It shifted out of the rooms the way a person pulls a blanket off one side of their body and throws it to the other. The kitchen grew cold enough that my breath made small heat shadows in front of my face. The hallway did not change. I put my hand in the air and felt the cold pool like water. Then, on some old reflex, I reached for my phone and opened the bank app because some part of me believed a number will bring you back into the world of usual things. The second half of the money arrived at 3:01. The notice showed up as a small banner across the top of my screen with a green check and the number I had been waiting for. I looked at the timestamp with its little colon like a face, and I felt something give way in me that had been ready to be used back up if I had needed it. M sent a message right after. Almost done. They added, "Do not look into the glass on the oven until morning." I hadn't thought about the oven since seeing my late reflection in it. The instruction drew a tight circle around a thing I now wanted very much not to do. I stood with my back to the stove and watched my breath thin in front of me. The landline sat. The house was a held breath with no lung. At 3:17, the alarm on my phone sounded the way it does when you have told a device to tell you a thing at a time you will regret. I did not remember setting it. The label read, "Look now." It must have been something I set for myself earlier in the evening and had forgotten. I should have swiped it away. I should have turned the phone off and put it in the sink under water that tastes like iron. Instead, I turned around without moving my feet and looked at the oven door. My reflection looked back, and I braced for it to be someone else. It was me. It was me looking the way I look when I am about to make a small mistake to see if it actually matters. The light from the paper lamps made my face a series of warm planes. My eyes looked like they do when I am tired and have decided that being tired is not, for the time being, fixed. Then I saw the thing that did not belong. My reflection's mouth was closed, but I could hear myself breathing. If I had left the room then, I think I would have taken the door, the ledger, the rules, and the upstairs with me into whatever future I had. Instead, I leaned forward and put my fingertips against the cool glass. My reflection did not lift its hand to meet mine. It stood perfectly still and did not share even that small intimacy with me. Behind my reflection, the hall stretched out, and the guest room door was open just enough for a person to slip through sideways. My phone buzzed. A new photo came in. A picture taken from just behind my shoulder, looking where I looked, showing the oven door and the reflection of the hall and the open door. My shoulder in the picture was not quite in the same place my shoulder was now. The time in the lower right corner was 3:03. This was a photo from earlier. I had been making this mistake for a while, and the house had been keeping perfect time. I stepped back and put both hands on the counter. The laminate had bubbles in it near the seam where a hot pot had once sat. My palms found each small blister. I said, out loud, a name that was not mine. I said, I am here. The house did not move. I listened. From upstairs, the chain sound began again, and with it a whisper low enough that it sounded like silk pulled over floorboards. It said nothing I could understand. It did not say my name. I did not go upstairs. The rule had not said I couldn't, but everything else had. I went to the front room and sat in a chair near the window where I could see the edge of the porch if I leaned left and the edge of the hall if I leaned right. I set my phone to vibrate and put it under my thigh so the vibration would go into my muscles and not into the air. I watched the line where the light of the lamp ended on the floor and the dark of the house began. The dark had edges like fabric, and it held its shape like a person holding a glass level in a crowded room. At some point, I must have fallen into one of those thin sleeps that is more like waiting. I woke when the landline made a sound like a bird tapping at a window once and turning its head. The clock said 4:12. The upstairs made the small sound that wood makes when it has cooled after a day of holding someone's steps. The blue ribbon on the guest room door lay still as if it had never been asked to do anything but be blue. I went to the kitchen and poured another glass of water. The faucet whined, a tiny violin. The water tasted faintly of copper, and the cold gathered in my teeth like a small storm. I stood with the glass in my hand and watched the kitchen door in the reflection in the window. Outside, the yard had turned into a darker place with lighter edges. A tiny spider worked the corner by the latch, throwing lines. At 4:38, a car passed on the road, slow and steady, its tires humming like a faraway hive. The sound went through the house and left the back door ajar in my mind, as if I could step out and follow that sound and catch the car by its tail. I did not move. The house had not asked me to move. The rules were not finished with me yet. Just before 5, the sound upstairs made a new shape. Not steps, not chain. The sound of someone dragging a chair away from a desk and sitting down. That sound has a curve in it, a weight that comes down and then settles a little to the side. The room above me now had someone in it, sitting. I held the counter's edge and felt the small roughness of the laminate. The house waited. I waited with it. The first light of day came like cold water poured onto warm stone. The edges of things sharpened. The paper lamps were no longer necessary and looked cheap. The fern's green looked more like plastic than like a plant that had survived the night. I walked to the side door. My shoes were where I had left them. I put them on, and my fingers felt stiff like the morning had gotten into them and locked them up in careful ways. I texted M, leaving at first light. The message delivered. A reply came at once. Good, don't look back at the upper windows. The last rule repeated like a knot tied twice. I felt the tug to look the way you feel the tug to scratch something healing. I put my hand on the latch. The metal held the cold the night had given it, like it was proud to have carried something. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The boards were damp. The air had become a thin thing like breath. The hedges at the edge of the yard held dew like beads. The gate had a small web across the corner, the spider's quick work undone by the latch's movement. I turned the lock on the side gate, and the metal made a small clack like a polite cough. I did not look back. I walked to my car. The trees along the old road exhaled. The house behind me carried itself like a person who has decided not to say goodbye. I got in, turned the key, and drove. I did not use the rearview mirror. My hands on the wheel were cold and left damp prints. At the end of the street, where the new part of town starts and the sidewalks are even, my phone buzzed. A message from M, "Thank you." The tone was warmer than any other they had sent. A second message followed, "Check your sink when you get home." I read that twice because it was such an ordinary instruction that it hit me like striking a match in a room filled with vapor. Home was warm, warmer than I had left it, as if the walls had been holding breath and let it go. The refrigerator hummed. The floor caught and released my steps like it always did. The sink shone from its last half-hearted scrub. I set down my bag and went to the sink because M had said to, and the habit of following rules was still on me like a coat I had not taken off yet. There, where the drain is, was a small folded paper. It was dry, as if it had not ever touched water. The paper was from a spiral pad. The top had the ragged edge from being torn free. The paper had a smell that had no place in my kitchen, a smell like cold closets and lemon oil. I unfolded it. It was not a new set of rules. It was the list from the kitchen at M's house, copied in my own hand. My handwriting was mine. I saw the way I make the letter R as if it always means to fall over and never does. I did not remember writing it. At the bottom, there was a new line in the neat block letters I had come to know as M's hand. 10. If you find this, do not answer the phone for the rest of today. My phone buzzed on the counter as if it had been waiting at the top of some small hill and had just been given a push. The display lit with an unknown number local area code. The call log filled the top half of the screen. 7:06 a.m., 7:07 a.m., 7:08 a.m. A voicemail popped up like a bubble and held itself there, letting me decide. The picture of my sister's windy porch face slid left as if I had done it with a thumb I hadn't moved. I put the paper on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a lemon. The magnet clicked softly, a tiny version of the side gate closing. I stood in the little light that comes under the curtains in my kitchen and listened to my phone go on ringing. It stopped. It started again. I left it on the counter and went to the sink and turned on the water and let it run and taste like iron while the morning stood outside, waiting its turn. M sent one more message at noon. The ledger will come by mail. Do not sign your name. I wrote back, what should I sign then? The reply took a long time and came while I was standing in the hallway looking at the small spots on the wall I hadn't chosen to notice in months. M wrote, the name you used last night. I looked at the paper on the fridge where I had written the rules in my own hand without remembering, and at the line I had added in a careful block that did not belong to me, and felt something settle into a shape it had been waiting for. I sat on my couch and slept without dreams for an hour and woke with the sound in my head of a chain lowered into a well with care. The apartment was warm again. Outside, the afternoon looked ordinary, the way the sky does after it has done a trick and goes back to blue so nobody asks it questions. The phone lay face down. The rules on the fridge made a small rectangle of shadow on the wall. That evening, I called my sister from a pay phone by the bus station because I could not stand to hear her voice ringing from my own quiet rooms. She answered. She laughed. She told me about her day as if the day had been made only for people like her and not for people like me who sometimes find their names written next to times. When she said my name, I felt the empty place inside the house last night hold its shape and then let it go. I said her name back and felt nothing tug. The ledger arrived 3 days later, in a padded envelope that smelled faintly of lemon oil and a long hallway. The mail carrier handed it to me without any ceremony, a package like any other box in a world full of boxes. I brought it inside and set it on my table and did not open it until the light had gone out of the day, and the room held me the way a room holds a person who is not ready to go to bed. When I opened it, the first thing I saw was my own careful writing on the line under M, the name I had used when strangers needed something temporary. The times were marked in the same neat hand as the rest, and mine ended when the morning came. Across from my line, in a different ink, was a small mark that looked like two doors face to face with a thin line between them. The mark meant something to someone. I learned to make it without asking. I did the next night and some nights after. Not always that house, not always those rules. Not always, there are other houses that pay quiet money and ask you to obey their small commandments. Some rules do not repeat. Some do. The ledger grows. The names set a kind of music. Sometimes, when the landline rings and goes silent at the second ring, I think of M's voice that never was and of my own voice on a line that said I am you after. Sometimes I hear my name said from the dark and answer with the name I wrote down that night, and the house nods to itself and lets the cold go back where it came from. I hung a mirror in my kitchen with the back to the room. My sister teased me and called me a stagehand. The mirror has not asked to be turned around. The paper on my fridge has gathered a small greasy spot where my hand touches near Rule 3. The magnet shaped like a lemon is a little looser than it was, and sometimes in the morning I find it an inch lower, the way gravity reminds you gently that it is not a rule but a habit the world keeps. Today, I came home and set down my keys, and in the reflection in the oven door, my living room looked the way it always does. My couch. The blanket I should have washed 2 days ago, the small drape of light from the street. On the floor near the hall, just where the runner would be in M's house, there were 4 small wet footprints, as if someone had stepped in with careful feet, set them down 1, 2, 3, 4, and then remembered the rule about not being seen and lifted themselves very slowly and politely into the air.